Welcome back to Light Talk, where the paranormal and the supernatural is a part of our everyday life. If you have a story you would like to share, email me at lighttalk423@gmail.com. And while you're at it, click on the like, share, and subscribe buttons. And while you're at it, I'm going to add in there to check out the website at www.lighttalkwithdana.com. All right, let's get started today. We have a fabulous guest for you. And I'm going to go ahead and hand the mic over to you. So, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much, Dana. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I was having a little trouble here. My name's Joe Giampapa, as I mentioned before, and I've had quite a few various encounters with, I don't know, I guess you could call it the other side or something. And I'm planning to write a book on it because I've had so many, but I find it fascinating that basically we're never alone. And I think it was very interesting to encounter some of these.
Yeah.
You want me to start off telling you some of the interesting things that have happened to me? Basically, in 2009, I lost my son. And it was interesting because prior to losing my son, he lived in Sparks, which is right next to Reno, Nevada. And I lived up in the mountains about 50 miles away. And my son was always worried about me when I would go home after visiting him, because there would be no cell service in the mountains and everything. He always wanted to make sure I got home okay safely. And so we worked up this system where when I would get home, I would call him, let the phone ring once and hang up. And then he would hear the loud ring and he knew everything was okay. And we had the same system with him when he would visit me. He would get home, call me, let the phone ring once, and then I knew he got home okay. Anyway, that was kind of the thing we had going for about 4 or 5 years. And when my son passed, I'll never forget, I was at home alone. I had a renter in my house at the time, and it was 6 o'clock in the morning on my son's birthday, right after he had passed. And all of a sudden, the smoke detector gave one loud blast. And I remember the gal came out of her room. She said, "Oh, are we on fire? What's going on?" And I said, "No, that's just my son telling me that he's okay." And it was really nice and kind of heartwarming. But the interesting thing was, later, the following year, I moved into town to be with my grandkids. And sure enough, on my son's birthday, 7 o'clock in the morning, the smoke detector in my new apartment suddenly gave a loud blast. And again, I knew it was my son and everything was okay. And the irony is, 2 other apartments that I had moved to, every time on my son's birthday, I would get a blast on the smoke detector. And I thought that was fascinating because I suppose if it just happened at one time, somebody can rationalize and say, well, it was a short in the circuit or something. But to be in every single smoke detector for each of the apartments, I thought was fascinating. So that really impressed me.
Yeah,
I could tell you about another one if you'd like.
Yeah, go for it.
I was legal guardian of a gentleman that he passed away at 90 years old. And I was a teacher at the time. And he lived by himself, but I would bring him his medication every day. And then I would go off to school. And after school, I would come back and check on him and everything. And I remember one time I was running late. I was in my apartment and I gathered all my papers and shoved them into my briefcase real quick. And I put all of his medications and everything in one of those little medicine things, where it has childproof lid and everything. And I sealed it and I was getting everything ready. And then I opened up the front door and I pushed out. I had one of those storm doors that has one of those power things so that the door doesn't slam shut. It comes back real slow. And I was running late. I had my briefcase in one hand, my lunch, and a bunch of books under my arm. And I opened the door and I used my foot and I pushed the storm door open. And I was going out. And all of a sudden, there was a loud bang, and the storm door just slammed right into me. And it knocked out all the books and briefcase and the medicine, and everything fell to the floor. And I thought, what in the world? Because there was no wind or anything. And I looked down, and the medicine container had opened up. That was the child-proof lid, mind you. It had opened up, and the pills fell out. And I went down to pick them up. And son of a gun, I saw I had accidentally given him 2 heart pills, which most likely probably would have killed him. And usually I'm very meticulous about making sure I'm accurate with all this medication. But on that particular day, like I say, I was in a hurry. I threw everything in the medicine thing and, was ready to go. And sure enough, I had given him 2 heart pills, which obviously probably would have killed him or something. So I tell you, I was so grateful. I remember I just looked up to the sky and said, thank you, thank you, thank you. But it's things like that that I find absolutely fascinating. Like the old saying, somebody up there is watching you, because somebody
Absolutely.
certainly was watching me that day.
And
Very
your friend.
interesting. Yeah. What's that?
And your friend.
Yeah, I tell you, it was really fascinating how that happened. And then another incident going back to my son, I told you I had all those incidents with the loud blast of a ring with my son. I used to make each one of my kids and my grandkids walking sticks because I lived up in the hills. And whenever they would come to me, they would take their walking sticks and I'd take mine and we'd go hiking and everything. And when my son passed, I took his walking stick and I brought it into my bedroom and I put 2 nails in the wall and I suspended my son's walking stick with wire onto the 2 nails. And so it was kind of horizontal across on the wall, hanging on these 2 wires and on the nails. And I kept it up there for, a good couple of years. And I remember one, I guess it must have been the day before my son's birthday. I was in my apartment and I expected to hear a loud blast the next day because my son's birthday is coming up. I'll probably get that blast. Sure enough, his birthday came and there was no blast on the smoke detector, no noise, no anything. And I was starting to feel pretty sad and dejected, like, what's going on? I guess he just moved on or something. And it was about 6 o'clock at night, and I was getting kind of depressed, and it was kind of cloudy out and everything. And I thought, well, no sense in hanging around. Might as well just go to bed. So I walked into my bedroom and looked up on the wall, and the walking stick was off the wall and was standing straight up against the wall. Now, I found that absolutely fascinating because somebody would have had to unwire that walking stick. So it couldn't be, even if there was an earthquake or something, the walking stick had been wired onto the nails. And again, it had been unwired and standing straight up. And I thought that was very, very fascinating. And I got such a warm feeling because I knew it was my son. My son obviously was telling me that he was okay and that he had been there. Who knows? Maybe he was checking on me.
Yeah. Yeah. Making sure you had your walking stick.
There you go. Yeah, it's really interesting how that works. Sometimes when you least expect it, things happen. And I find in talking to others, people who have lost people, like their wives or a child or somebody, they tell me that they usually get contact within a couple of weeks after the person has passed. And usually now, according to a lot of the people, it seems to come through electronic mediums, either through the television or the telephone, or in my case, a smoke detector. And so I find that kind of interesting. Perhaps, I don't know how the universe works, but evidently it seems to be easier to contact us through some of these electronic mediums, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
have those in like ghost huntings and stuff like that. They have the equipment where if they are close to it, it sets a beeping or something like that off. So they
right.
do have that.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. It really is. I remember prior to my son passing, probably about, I guess about 5 years prior, my mom had passed away. And I come from a large Italian family, and my mom was a typical Italian mom, always worried that we had enough food and enough this and enough that. And she was back in the Chicago area. And when I moved out west here, she was always concerned after my wife passed away and I was living by myself. She was always concerned that I was taking care of myself. Do you have enough food? Yeah, yeah. Are you warm enough? You got enough? How many blankets you got? And she was always making sure that I took care of myself. And I'd say, I'm okay, Mom. I am. So she said, okay, I trust you. And I brought her out to Nevada to stay with me for a while. And she finally needed some extra care. So we had to put her in a nursing home here in Nevada. And I remember it was one evening about 11 o'clock at night, I got a call and they said, Mr. Giampapa? I said, yes. They said, we have bad news. Your mom just passed away. And I said, oh my goodness, so sorry. And they said, could you come down, sign all the papers and the usual process and everything? I said, sure, I'll be right down. So I went down there and I called my son because my car was in the shop. He came and picked me up and we went down to the nursing home. And I went through all the usual procedures, signing all the papers and everything. And then my son brought me back to my apartment and he said, you want me to stay with you, Dad? And I said, no. I said, I'll be okay. So he went home. So I went back into my apartment. And I remember I was in my bedroom and I used to have an old like cuckoo clock that had a real loud ticker on it, almost like the old metronomes that they use by pianos. Tick, 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 tick. And it was very loud. And I remember I was sitting on the bed and I can hear the thing ticking, tick, 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 tick. And I looked around. I thought, well, might as well go to bed. So I got ready for bed, climbed into bed, and I was starting to think of everything that had happened that night, all the things that had transpired, and I fell asleep. And all of a sudden, it seemed like it was the middle of the night. Suddenly, I woke up and sat up, and my mother was right at the foot of my bed. And I looked at her and I was so happy. I said, hey, Ma, it's good to see you. Let me show you around. And I remember I jumped out of bed and I was showing her all around my apartment because obviously she had never seen it. She couldn't climb stairs or anything. And I was on the second floor. So I'm giving her a tour of my apartment. And I go to the kitchen and I open the refrigerator. Look, Ma, I got all this food. And I go over to the linen closet. Look I got all these blankets and sheets and everything. And I'm giving her, the 50-cent tour of the entire apartment and everything. And I'm showing her all around everything. Then I remember saying, okay, Ma, I love you a lot. I'll see you. And I remember she kind of just whisked off into the nether. And I sat on the bed smiling. And then I leaned back and fell asleep. And I remember waking up in the morning and thinking, wow, that was really a weird dream. And I looked at my clock and it had been 15 minutes slow. And that was really interesting because that clock had never missed time at all before. It was one of the most accurate clocks I ever saw. And it was 15 minutes behind time. And so I thought that was very fascinating. It was like my mom probably said on her way out, wait a minute, I got to make sure my son's okay. I want to check on my son.
Yeah.
And I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, just got to make sure you're all okay.
Exactly. Typical mom checking on her son. Yeah. So I find these things really fascinating. And, I suppose in many instances, people can try to rationalize these things away, saying it was a very, very vivid dream and everything. But to see other things falling into place, like that clock, how it was 15 minutes slow and everything, like time stood still during that episode. I find that really, those things are kind of hard to explain.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Especially when you have the tangible stuff of the clock behind.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's fascinating. And I tell you, I've talked to friends who have had different things happen to them and everything, and more they seem to be occurring. And I remember I went to a lecture with Deepak Chopra, and he said the veil between the other side and our side is getting thinner and thinner. And he said that we are going to see more and more encounters with the other side. And it seems like I'm certainly starting to experience them. And I find it not only fascinating, but wonderful. It's very heartwarming to see that the connection of love is still there.
Yeah, Absolutely. Absolutely. So do you typically just hear things, or
I
well, it's
do.
more hearing?
Yeah, well, I think I see things, results of things that have happened. Like I say, the walking stick upright, or I'll hear the loud sound or something like that. Yes, but my daughter can actually see images. I guess different people get in different signals or something with, through our senses. Some can smell things, I've heard, and my daughter can see things, and I tend to hear things, I guess. So I guess we tend to get notified through whatever sense of ours which is the strongest. So that's
Yeah.
kind of neat.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is pretty cool. It is pretty.
Here in Nevada, there are a lot of ghost stories from the Civil War and things like that. And I remember one time my wife and my daughter were on a special ghost tour at one of the old time hotels. It was in Gold City, which is right next to Virginia City, which was one of the most famous cities in the 1800s. And my wife and daughter were with the crowd, probably about 15 people, and the guide was leading them through the hotel and was in kind of the lobby, I guess, and was telling stories about the hotel and everything. And my daughter, being my daughter, 18 years old, she always kind of does her own thing. She wandered off by herself away from the group, and she went up the stairs and she was looking around, walked down the hallway, and she opened up one of the doors, and there was this old prospector taking a bath, and he had a scrub brush down his back and everything, and a big beard. And my daughter got so embarrassed. She said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." And right away, she closed the door and got all embarrassed and went down the hall and came down the stairs. And she came up next to my wife, and my wife turned around and said, "Where were you?" And my daughter says, "I walked away and I went into the room and I accidentally walked in on this guy taking a bath." And suddenly the tour guide heard my daughter and she said, "Excuse me, what did you say?" And my daughter, very embarrassed, said, "I accidentally went upstairs, walked into one of the rooms, and walked in on a guy taking a bath." And the guy said, "Those rooms haven't been rented for at least 20 years." And they all went up there, and sure enough, all the rooms were empty. So I think that
Oh,
was kind of fascinating. Yeah. But
yeah.
my daughter has had other episodes where she has encountered different, usually what do I want to say, pioneers and people out in the hills. Sometimes one time we were near the Oregon Trail, which is interesting, and we were told, well, this is where all the covered wagons came and everything. And like always, my daughter wandered off, and she came back and she said, "Dad, you're not going to believe this." I said, "What?" She said, "You see that tree over there?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "I went over to the tree," and she said, all of a sudden there was this woman with two little children sitting under the tree, and they were having a picnic, and they were like pioneers with all the old time clothes and everything. And I said,
Oh,
"Really?" I said, "Right there?" And she says, "Yeah." I said, "There's nobody there." She says, "I know, there's nobody there now." But it was fascinating because she would have these encounters. And I would love to have that sometime. I've never seen anybody or anything like that, but my daughter seems to have that. I don't know if it's a special ability or what, but she has
it's
seen quite a few
clairvoyance.
things. Yeah, and it's
Yeah,
happened quite often. And I thought that was pretty fascinating.
that's
Yeah,
awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I see things once in a great while. I've seen a face peek around corners at
right.
work, and I've had a couple things like that.
Has it
Uh,
happened to you when you were a child, or only since you've been an adult, or all your life?
as a child, I did have an encounter of seeing three faces pop up out of trash cans. My grandma had
Wow.
55 gallon trash barrels that she would burn her trash in.
Right.
And walking by them, one time I saw a face in each one of those barrels, just kind of poking up, just like from about this up. And yeah, that scared them out of me. I was about 6 years old.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
fascinating though, how that happens. Prior to my mother's passing, and I remember talking to a lot of other people just in general conversation. People say that before we die, depending on the circumstance, we will see people on the other side asking us to cross over or whatever. And I remember when I went to visit my mom at the rest home one time, it was real quiet, and I walked over and sat next to her bed, and she said, Joe, she said, they were here again. And I said, who? What are you talking about, Mom? She said, the people. I said, what people? She said, I don't know. She said, the crowd of people, they were here again, kind of looking at me and waving me to come over. And I said, what are you talking about? What did they look like? And she pointed to the wall, and she said, they were coming through that wall. And I said, what are you talking about? She said, think of a large sheet of latex, rubberized. And she said, imagine somebody on the other side pushing their face through this rubber sheet. And that's what you could see. She said, that's how it was for me. I saw all these faces pushing through the wall. And I thought, wow, that's an interesting, interesting experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that happened just a couple of days before she passed away. So
Yeah.
I guess
Yeah.
sometimes we get an invitation like that.
Yeah. My father-in-law was the same way. He was in hospice, and I saw him laying there, and he was looking up to the ceiling, and he started smiling, and then he, go back down. So at that point, he was, I believe he was like a foot over. So he'd already started crossing over.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah,
Yeah.
the gentleman who I was legal guardian for, the one I told you where I accidentally had the wrong medication, he would call me sometimes. I remember about a month prior to his passing away, I got a call like 2 in the morning, and he said, Joe, I go, what? He said, they're here again. I said, who? He said, the people. I said, what people? He said, I don't know who they are, but they want me to go with them. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, I don't know. I woke up from bed, and he said, I got all these people around my bed, and they're smiling, and they're trying to get me to go with them, and I don't want to go. And I said, what are you talking? He said, I don't want to go. I'll get them out of my house. I said, well, I'm where I am, and you are where you are. Did you tell him you don't want to go? And he said, yeah, I tried to tell him that. And I said, okay, well, then I guess you just don't go. He said, got that right. And he hung up the phone. So I guess he had a visit, which is interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Typically, from what I understand, it's usually past relatives. Maybe these were
Interesting.
relatives they didn't recognize, or what, that were further down the line.
I find all of these things really fascinating. I've got a
Mhm.
couple of friends that are atheists, and they say, well, when we're dead, that's it. There's nothing there. But the more I have these encounters and talk to other people who have had encounters, it pretty much vivifies in my mind that definitely there's something going on the other side.
Yeah. Yeah. When my mom passed, my brother was able to see her crossover. He,
Wow.
yeah, he had this inclination to look up in the corner of the room, and when he did, he got to see the tunnel, and he got to see mom walking up towards the tunnel, and she turned around and says, I'm going to be okay, everything's good. It's going to be okay. And she
Wonderful.
turned around and went into the tunnel.
That's
Yeah,
amazing. That's beautiful. The
it
thing is
is.
that it's so comforting when that happens.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
great. That's really wonderful.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's confirmation for my brother, and it was kind of confirmation for all of us, to be able to
Oh,
know that.
exactly. And you've been doing this, I guess, with your show for a few years now, correct?
2 years.
Yeah. And I'm sure you've talked to many, many people who have had these experiences.
Yep. Yep. A lot of people have had them, or has witnessed it, or in one way or another. Yeah. It's pretty
Well,
crazy.
well, you know, it's interesting. It was near Halloween one time, and I was teaching school, and just out of the blue, we got on the subject of strange things happening like that. And we got on the subject, and I asked, just, I suppose maybe I shouldn't have as a teacher. It's none of my business, I guess. But I was just curious, and I told them an experience that happened to me, and I shared it with my kids, my students. They were high school kids. And I said, how many of you have ever experienced something that's considered supernatural or the unknown or whatever? And I expected maybe one or two kids, but I'll be a son of a gun. Out of about 30 students, I had at least 20 to 25 kids raise their hand. And they took it so serious. They all wanted to tell their stories of encounters
That
with the other side.
that is amazing in itself that these
Yes,
kids would be open enough to say, "Hey, I did." That's
exactly. Exactly. They were very serious about it. Then they raised their hand. And I thought this is really good because rather than be afraid or say, oh, this is crazy and that's nutty, they took it very serious and they were very serious. They wanted to share.
that
And
is awesome. And they trusted you to
yeah,
do that. So good for you.
well, maybe I would have got reprimanded. You know, you're not supposed to ask this stuff with the kids. But I was just
Maybe.
curious. I I remember another time I was teaching middle school and it was my preparation time and I needed some staples or something. So I walked to the office. It was about 9:30 or something in the morning. And I asked the secretary, and the secretary went to get me my supplies and started to bring them to the counter when this one girl comes running in. And she comes up to the counter and she asks for a tardy slip. And the secretary says, oh boy, okay, again, what's your excuse? And the girl says, no excuse. It was our poltergeist. He was just playing jokes on us again. And the secretary looked at her and she says, I beg your pardon. And the girl says, oh, we have this ghost in the house and he's always playing tricks on us. And I was standing right there and I was kind of fascinated. I said, you have what? And she says, we have this ghost that's always doing crazy things in our house. And I said, like what? And she said, well, there's just my mom and I, but sometimes we'll go to bed maybe an hour later or something like that. The toilet will start to flush. Somebody will flush the toilet and we'll hear walking down the hall and everything. And she went on with these crazy. And I said, are you afraid? She says, oh, no. She said, it's not a harmless person, whatever it is. She said, just always playing jokes. And she said, today she put the clocks ahead an hour or back an hour or whatever. Says, this person fools with our clocks quite often. So I said, okay. So the secretary just kind of shrugged her shoulders and wrote across the note, late because of the ghost, and gave it to the girl.
Wow. Hey, I mean,
Yeah.
that in itself is really interesting too, because she was open enough to tell the secretary, hey, this is what's going on. And she was truthful about it.
Oh, exactly. I mean, the secretary thought, perhaps maybe she's making up another story, but the girl took it, she was very matter of fact about it. And she wasn't afraid or anything. She says, oh, no, we've been living with this. It's a poltergeist. That's what she called it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
yeah, I find it fascinating.
Yeah, it definitely is. It definitely is. I've had a time at work that I was doing some inventory on some items and I had a clipboard in my hand and nobody was around me, but suddenly my clipboard just kind of like someone had tapped it and just enough to move it. And I look up and here's this guy walking away with this plaid shirt on and just walking away, probably around 6 foot, you know. And I look up more deeply and it's like, I don't recognize that guy. That guy doesn't belong here. And
Absolutely,
yeah, sure
absolutely
enough,
fascinating when that
yeah.
happens.
Yeah, and I talked to a friend of mine that got me into this. This is where we met. I'm like, he just saw this happen, or this here just happened, and he goes, "Oh, yeah, that's the guy that used to work here. He passed
Oh,
away, and he's still hanging out." I'm like, "Okay,
that's interesting.
yeah, Yeah,
Absolutely amazing.
yeah.
I remember a psychic told me one time to never be afraid of encounters because there's no way they can hurt us.
I
So
don't know. I mean, it's all energy. So, and you hear of stories that people get hurt and scratched and, all kinds of stuff. So, I think if you're not afraid of them, you'll take on a positive energy, and
right.
that positive energy will bring in the more positive. So if you're
I
scared of
agree.
them, yeah, you'll have
Yeah,
that negative filled with it. Yeah.
yeah. I really I I thank you for your show because it these things need to be brought to light more and more so those people who perhaps are afraid of stuff like this, when they can see how often it happens to people and everything, almost on an everyday occurrence, they'll be less afraid.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm with you on that. This last face that I've seen, I was more ready to kind of like open up to it. Prior, it's been, what was that?
It,
It's kind of like,
yeah.
oh, whoa. And now it's getting to the point, it's happening enough now that it's like, oh, okay, I just need to talk to him, And so it's not like,
Yeah.
oh, it happened. And then it's, oh man, I forgot to talk to him. Now I feel like it's getting closer. Okay, hey, I see you. How are you? Kind of thing.
Yeah, it's beautiful, and see it's wonderful that you're so accepting now, because I think the more accepting we are, the more these things will occur.
I'm working on it. Yeah. Yeah. I don't have a whole lot. I mean, I think it's been really tough here the last few months, but yeah, it happens and it just happens out of the blue, so it catches me completely off guard, you know.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
beautiful. But see, that's great that you're such an accepting person, and so that makes it, yeah, that's wonderful because it just encourages the communication all the more, and that's great.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm
That's
working on
awesome.
it.
Well, you're doing a bang up job.
I hope so because, I'm so excited to be able to actually have a conversation with them,
Oh
to
yeah.
actually speak and be able to hear them and the whole works. And there's just so many questions I have that I just, and I
Well, it's
think I only
fascinating.
feel, yeah, I feel they're the ones that's going to be able to answer my questions.
Sure, exactly. That's awesome. And the more you share these stories with other people, the more that knowledge you start to have, and the puzzle starts coming together.
Hmm. That's
Awesome.
right. That's right. And I love having these stories on the show because of that. People can tell their stories and they don't have to be afraid. This is open for everyone to know that this stuff is out there and to know kind of how to work with it and just
It's awesome.
I just love it. Yeah, I love to hear the stories. I love to tell my stories, and I just, like you're saying, I just don't want anyone to think that they're going crazy because something weird happened and they're
Oh,
not sure about it.
you hit the
Yeah.
nail on the head. Yeah, your show is so wonderful for that. Because
Thank you.
we can all take comfort knowing that we're not the only ones. It happens to other people.
Yep. Everybody has it's like everybody has the same story, but it's absolutely different. So, I mean, you know, it's everyone has something that they've seen or heard or experienced, but it's done differently.
Yes,
It's something
it's,
just different happens. It's great.
yeah, kind of unique unto them.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Exactly.
it's
Exactly.
wonderful. Well,
Yeah.
I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me and letting me share.
Oh, it's absolutely. I am so happy that you're willing to share. And that goes for all my guests and, all my subscribers. Thank you guys for listening, for telling your stories, and it's just been so much fun. I love doing this.
Well,
So much fun.
it's wonderful because when we first encounter things like this, we think we're the only one. But when we start to see other people having these experiences, then we see we're not alone, and it becomes less frightening, less scary, and it's a great experience. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know that others have the same experiences, so you have someone to talk to, that
Right.
they can talk and not feel like they're being laughed at or made fun of or anything, because this stuff is true. I mean, this is out there. It's
Exactly.
there. Yeah,
Exactly. It's the real McCoy. Plus,
exactly.
for people when you start when you get to be my age, and people that as you get older and stuff, you think, well, gee, I'm going to be going over to the other side pretty soon. I'd like to know a little bit about what's over there. It becomes less scary. And it
Hmm.
seems like almost to the point where you can't wait to get over there and talk to these people or whatever and see what it's
Yeah,
all about.
yeah, I'm kind of like that too. It's kind of like, okay, someone passes, like, oh man, I'm so jealous. You know,
Yeah,
it's
fascinating.
fantastic.
It's something else. Well,
Yeah.
thank you, Dana. I sure appreciate you talking with me.
Oh, I appreciate your time and to being with us, and you're welcome back anytime
Thank you.
and to chat about some more experiences. And I think it's fantastic that people are willing to do this, to
Definitely.
talk, tell their stories. Yeah.
I agree. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being with us. And if there's anybody else out there that has a story they would like to share and to express to other people, by all means, email me lighttalk423@gmail.com. And while you're at it, click on the like, share, and subscribe buttons, and check out my website at www.lighttalkwithdana.com. All right. We'll talk with everybody next time. All right. Bye.
Bye bye. Thank you.